On a cold, silent night, behind a hospital dumpster, a sharp bark breaks the stillness. What Rex, the fearless canine, finds hidden in the shadows will change everything. A tiny, helpless newborn, abandoned and fighting for life, who could leave a baby there. And why? Stay with us, because this is a story of hope, courage, and the incredible bond between man, dog, and a little life saved against all odds. The night was unnervingly quiet around Mercy General Hospital, the kind of quiet that presses down on your chest and makes every little sound your own breathing, the distant hum of machines feel louder than they should. Officer Mark Hansen pulled up in his patrol car, his breath visible in the cool night air. It was nearly midnight, but the emergency room was still softly lit, a faint buzz leaking from its windows like a pulse keeping the hospital alive. Mark glanced down at Rex, his canine partner, a powerful German shepherd with sharp, intelligent eyes that flickered in the headlights. Rex sat alert beside the car, ears twitching at the slightest noise. They had been called here on a TIPA, suspicious noise reported near the hospital's back dumpsters. Nothing concrete, just a vague report from a nurse who thought she heard a baby crying. Mark didn't believe in coincidences. Something about the call felt off, too vague, too desperate. He shook his head and clicked open the car door. "Let's check it out, boy," he murmured, patting Rex's head. The two moved carefully along the dimly lit alley behind the hospital. The smell of antiseptic and garbage mingled unpleasantly. Mark's flashlight cut through the shadows, illuminating the rows of dumpsters and discarded boxes. Then came a faint, almost inaudible sound, a soft whimper that froze Mark in his tracks. Rex stiffened. His nose twitched as he sniffed the air, then darted forward, barking low and urgent. Mark's heart pounded. "Easy. Rex, what do you see?" The dog's barking grew more insistent as he pawed at the base of a large green dumpster. Mark crouched and shone his light under the rusted metal lid. A bundle of blankets peeked out. His hands trembled as he reached in, pulling out a tiny, fragile bundle. The unmistakable sound of a newborn's cry filled the air, a soft, pitiful wail that sliced through the night like a plea for help. "Holy ... it's a baby," Mark whispered, panic and disbelief crashing through him all at once. He quickly wrapped the baby in his jacket, cradling the tiny body close. The infant's skin was cold, her breaths shallow but steady. The blankets were damp and soiled, and she was wrapped in nothing but a thin hospital blanket, discarded like garbage. Mark glanced around nervously. Who would do such a thing? Who would leave a helpless newborn abandoned in a trash bin behind a hospital? The night suddenly felt even colder. Mark pulled out his radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 17. We have a newborn female found abandoned behind Mercy General, requesting immediate medical and backup assistance. Over." A calm voice crackled back. "Copy, Unit 17. Medical team is en route. Stay with the infant. Help is coming." As Mark held the baby, Rex stayed close, standing guard with unwavering loyalty. The dog's presence was a comfort, a silent promise that the tiny life in Mark's arms was not alone. The sirens came quickly, piercing the night as paramedics arrived with their stretcher and equipment. Mark handed over the baby with gentle care. The paramedics murmured reassurances, wrapping her in warm blankets and rushing her toward the emergency entrance. Mark followed, heart thudding with every step. He'd been a cop for 15 years. But moments like this, when a life so small and so fragile depended on him, felt like the weight of the whole world. Inside the hospital was brighter, but no less tense. Nurses and doctors worked swiftly, checking the baby's vitals, warming her up, and giving her oxygen. Mark watched from the sidelines, helpless but determined. "Looks like she's going to be okay for now," a nurse said quietly, shooting Mark a hopeful glance. He nodded but couldn't shake the question burning in his mind. Who could abandon a newborn like this? What desperate story lay behind those tiny eyes? As he stepped outside for a breath of air, Rex at his side, Mark's radio buzzed again. "Officer Hansen, we have reports of suspicious activity near the hospital earlier tonight. Security footage shows a figure loitering near the dumpsters around the time you found the baby." Mark's jaw tightened. "Send me the footage." The images on the screen were grainy dark shapes, moving quickly, faces blurred. It was clear. Someone had left the baby there, and they'd done it under cover of night. Mark's thoughts raced. Was this a case of a desperate mother who had nowhere else to turn? Or was something more sinister at play? His mind flashed to the baby's fragile hands, the soft cry that still echoed in his ears. "I won't let this go," Mark said, voice low but firm. "Not while Rex and I are on the case. If you want to follow Rex and Mark's journey as they unravel this mystery and save lives, make sure to subscribe to our channel, Brave Animals. Every story here is about courage, hope, and the incredible bond between humans and their four-legged heroes." Hospital, waiting for leads and updates. Rex refused to leave the newborn's side, his protective instincts as sharp as ever. As the hours crawled by, Mark's mind wandered back to the little girl, so tiny, so vulnerable, wrapped in nothing but a hospital blanket tossed aside like refuse. He thought about all the newborns he'd seen brought in for routine care, surrounded by loving families. This little one had none of that. The contrast was cruel. Mark's eyes scanned the hospitals. Perimeter through the rain-streaked windows. The shadows outside seemed to shift and move, hiding secrets waiting to be uncovered. He felt the weight of those secrets pressing down on him. Rex suddenly growled low in his throat, ears pricked toward the darkened hospital courtyard. Mark followed. The dog's gaze, a figure moved stealthily near the emergency exit, someone watching, waiting. Mark's hand instinctively went to his sidearm, heart pounding. "Stay here, Rex," he whispered, moving toward the door. But Rex was already a few steps ahead, alert and ready. The figure vanished into the night before Mark could get close. Back inside, Mark reviewed the footage again. Something wasn't right. The person who left the baby was cautious but desperate. Mark clenched his fists. "Whoever you are, we'll find you." Rex sat beside him, a steady presence in the swirling storm of questions and fear. That night was just the beginning. A newborn's cry had shattered the silence and stirred a community to action. And with Rex's nose to the ground and Mark's unwavering determination, the hunt for answers was on. The next morning, at Mercy General, the hospital buzzed with a strange mix of urgency and quiet whispers. Nurse Kelly Thompson wiped her hands on her scrub top and glanced over at the tiny crib where the abandoned newborn lay. The baby's cheeks were flushed pink. A small rise and fall of her chest, a silent testament to her fragile fight for life. Mark Hansen stood nearby, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. He hadn't left the hospital since the night before. Rex, too, remained calm but alert, his golden-brown coat gleaming under the fluorescent lights. "Any sign of who she might be?" Mark asked Kelly. The nurse shook her head. "Nothing yet. No ID, no notes, no clues other than a thin hospital blanket. No mother or family has come forward. It's like she appeared out of nowhere." Mark felt a knot tighten in his stomach. "And the security footage? Any progress?" Kelly pulled a tablet from her pocket and swiped through the hospital's surveillance system. The footage was grainy, the figure's face always obscured by a hood or shadows. Whoever it was, they knew how to avoid cameras. "Looks like the person was in a hurry," Kelly added. "Maybe someone desperate or scared." Mark stared at the screen. "That's what worries me the most. Desperation can push people to do awful things, especially around here." The hospital was located in a working-class neighborhood on the outskirts of town, not far from sprawling industrial complexes and low-income housing. It was the kind of place where families struggled to get by, where hope was sometimes in short supply. Mark and Rex had worked cases in this area before, involving everything from theft to violent crime. But this one felt different. This was about a life no bigger than his hand. Later that morning, Mark met with Detective Sarah Lopez at the station. She was a sharp, no-nonsense kind of cop, the kind who cut through noise to get to the truth. Mark briefed her on the situation, showing the footage and describing the scene. "We have a newborn, abandoned behind the hospital. No ID, no leads, just Rex's nose and that security footage. Whoever did this didn't want to be seen." Sarah frowned, scrolling through the video on her tablet. "Did anyone check if there's been any reports of missing infants in the area?" Mark nodded. "That was the first thing I asked. No official missing baby reports so far, but it's possible the mother hasn't come forward. Maybe she's afraid." Sarah's eyes darkened. "Or maybe she's hiding something. This could be a case of abuse, trafficking, or worse." We can't rule anything out. Mark felt the weight of the words settle over him. The darker side of humanity lurked just beneath the surface in every city, every neighborhood. But today, he was determined to be the light for this little girl. Back at the hospital, Rex lay quietly by the baby's crib. The dog had a unique connection to the child, sensing her vulnerability and instinctively protecting her. Kelly watched the scene with a soft smile. You two make a good team. This baby's lucky to have you. Mark crouched down and ran a hand gently over Rex's head. Rex Dosen. Mark felt the weight of the words settle over him. The darker side of humanity lurked just beneath the surface in every city, every neighborhood. But today, he was determined to be the light for this little girl. Back at the hospital, Rex lay quietly by the baby's crib. The dog had a unique connection to the child. Sensing her vulnerability and instinctively protecting her, Kelly watched the scene with a soft smile. You two make a good team. This baby's lucky to have you. Mark crouched down and ran a hand gently over Rex's head. Rex doesn't take kindly to anyone hurting the innocent. As the hours passed, a nurse brought in a social worker named Lisa Matthews. She was tasked with ensuring the baby's safety once she left the hospital's care. Lisa's presence felt like a beacon of hope, a reminder that this child could have a future beyond the harshness she'd already faced. Lisa spoke softly with Mark and Kelly, discussing plans for temporary foster care and the procedures that would follow. Mark listened, grateful for the support, but restless to move forward with the investigation. That evening, as the hospital halls grew quiet, Mark returned to the security room to examine the footage one more time. He watched the grainy figure move near the dumpsters. Their footsteps hurried, but calculated. Then Rex barked sharply behind him. Ears perked. Mark turned just in time to see Rex sniffing the corner of the room, nose pressed against a small, crumpled piece of paper that had somehow slipped behind a filing cabinet. Mark picked it up carefully. The paper was a torn hospital receipt, dated just hours before the baby was found. The receipt showed a discharge from the hospital's maternity ward. Mark's heart pounded. This was the first concrete clue. Over the next few days, Mark and Sarah followed every lead the receipt offered. They tracked down the doctor listed on the paperwork, who confirmed that a woman matching the description on the discharge form had left the hospital abruptly. She was nervous, the doctor explained. She left without completing the usual checkout procedures. It was unusual. Sarah frowned. Did anyone recognize her? Any family or friends? No. She was alone, and she refused social services when we offered help. Mark exchanged a look with Sarah. We need to find this woman. Mark and Rex worked tirelessly, moving from one apartment complex to another, showing photos, asking neighbors if anyone had seen the woman. One afternoon, Rex suddenly stopped in front of a shabby building on the edge of the neighborhood. His ears twitched, his nose pressed to the ground. Mark followed him inside. The hallway smelled of stale smoke and old carpets. Rex tugged toward a door at the end, barking softly but urgently. Mark knocked, announcing himself. A young woman answered. Her eyes were tired, haunted. Her clothes were worn, and she looked as though she hadn't slept in days. Mark introduced himself gently. Nim, I'm Officer Hansen. We're trying to find a newborn who was abandoned near the hospital. Can you help us? The woman's eyes widened. She swallowed hard, her hands trembling. I don't know what you mean, she said, voice barely above a whisper. Mark softened his tone. If you're scared, you can talk to me. We're here to help. Rex sat calmly by Mark's side, his gaze steady, reassuring. The woman hesitated, but then nodded slowly. My name's Emily. I was the one who left the baby. Mark's breath caught. Emily's story spilled out in broken pieces, a story of fear, desperation, and heartbreak. She had given birth alone, without support, and felt trapped by a life. She couldn't face she'd fled the hospital, too ashamed and scared to seek help, I thought. If I left her there, someone would find her and take care of her, Emily whispered. Mark's heart ached. We want to help you, Emily, and we want to make sure your baby is safe. Emily nodded, tears streaming down her face. Back at the station, Mark filed the report. He knew Emily's story was only the beginning. There were deeper issues at play: poverty, mental health, fear of the system. But for now, there was hope. The baby was safe. Rex rested his head on Mark's knee, exhausted but content. Mark looked out the window at the darkening sky. "Tomorrow, we start the real work," he said quietly. In the quiet moments, Mark thought about the fragile thread that held life together, the invisible bonds between people, the power of kindness, and the courage it took to ask for help. And through it all, Rex remained the steadfast guardian of a tiny life that had already survived so much. The days that followed were a blur of paperwork, phone calls, and endless meetings. Mercy General Hospital had become a second home to Mark Hansen and Rex, the little newborn. Now nicknamed Hope by the hospital staff, was stable, her tiny fists curling and uncurling as if ready to fight the world. But while Hope's physical condition was improving, the shadows around her story were growing darker. Detective Sarah Lopez sat across from Mark in the cluttered precinct office, piles of case files and coffee cups crowding the table. "Emily's story feels incomplete," she said, tapping a pen against the paperwork. "She's terrified, but there's more beneath the surface. Someone else involved, maybe someone dangerous." Mark nodded. "I've been thinking the same thing. Emily's scared, but she's not stupid. There's something or someone she's protecting." Their shared look was heavy with unspoken truths. Cases like this rarely stayed simple for long. Meanwhile, Emily was placed in a temporary shelter, monitored by social services. She seemed withdrawn, barely speaking unless spoken to, and her eyes often darted nervously, as if expecting a threat to appear at any moment. Mark visited her once, sitting just outside the glass walls of the shelter's visiting room. He watched, as Rex lay calmly at his feet, ever watchful. "Emily," Mark said gently, "you don't have to face this alone. If there's someone hurting you or your baby, we want to help." Her hands trembled as she clutched a worn photograph, a faded image of a man with sharp eyes and a harsh jawline. "He's the reason I ran," Emily whispered. "I thought if I got away, I could protect my baby, but I don't know if I'm safe yet." Mark's jaw tightened. The kind of people who pushed young women to desperate acts didn't give up easily. "Tell me about him," Mark urged softly. Emily hesitated, then sighed, her voice breaking. "His name's Victor. He's controlling. I was scared from the moment I met him. He wanted control over me, over everything. When I found out I was pregnant, I tried to leave, but he found me every time." Mark's mind raced. This was no ordinary abandonment. It was a desperate act of survival. Back at the station, Sarah and Mark dug into Victor's background. They found a trail of complaints: domestic violence, intimidation, and worse. Yet Victor always managed to slip through the cracks of the legal system, leaving his victims trapped in silence. "People like Victor," Sarah said grimly, "don't just disappear. They have a way of showing up where you least expect them." Mark glanced at Rex, who seemed to sense the tension, his ears swiveling toward every sound. "We need to protect Emily and Hope before it's too late," Mark said firmly. Days later, as Emily settled into the shelter, Rex and Mark kept a constant watch. The dog's sharp senses caught every unusual sound, every shadow that moved with intent. One evening, as Mark drove Rex back to the precinct after a routine check, Rex suddenly stiffened in his seat, nose pressed to the window. "Something?" Mark asked. Rex gave a low growl. Mark's eyes narrowed. In the distance, under a flickering streetlight, a figure stood. Watkona, man with a familiar silhouette, Victor, Mark muttered under his breath. He slammed on the brakes and grabbed his radio dispatch. "Suspect spotted near the shelter, requesting immediate backup." But before Mark could reach the figure, Victor disappeared into the night like a ghost. The threat was real, and the stakes were higher than ever. Sarah organized a protective detail for Emily and the baby. Mark volunteered to oversee it personally. That night, as the shelter lights dimmed and most residents drifted off to sleep, Mark and Rex stationed themselves by the main entrance. Hours passed slowly. Rex's ears twitched at every noise: the creak of the old building, the distant bark of a dog, the whisper of wind through broken windows. Then came a sudden rustle outside. Mark's heart hammered as he grabbed his flashlight and motioned Rex. Forward, through the dark bushes, he spotted a figure creeping closer. Rex barked sharply, bounding toward the intruder. Mark followed swiftly, shouting, "Police! Stop!" The man froze, then bolted. Mark gave chase, running through back alleys and parking lots. It was Victor. The pursuit ended in a tense standoff. Near the riverbank, Victor's hands were empty, but his eyes burned with defiance. "You don't know what you're dealing with," Victor spat, voice rough. Mark raised his hand calmly. "I know enough to keep Emily and that baby safe. You're done hurting them?" Victor sneered but didn't resist arrest as Mark cuffed him. Rex sat quietly beside them, eyes never leaving the man. Back at the station, Victor's arrest brought a wave of relief, but also new questions. How many others had suffered in silence? How many more babies were at risk? Mark looked down at Rex, who seemed exhausted but proud. "Good boy, partner," Mark said softly. The newborn Hope remained under the hospital's watchful care, slowly gaining strength every day. Days later, Mark visited Emily again, this time with a sense of hope in his step. "She's safe," Mark told Emily, gesturing toward the tiny crib behind the glass wall. Tears filled Emily's eyes. "Thank you for everything," Mark smiled. "We'll make sure you both get the help you need." Rex lay at Mark's feet, a silent guardian of hope. Mark knew this was just the beginning for Emily, for Hope, and for every soul caught in the shadows of fear, but with determination, compassion, and a dog's unwavering loyalty. There was a chance for healing, and that was worth everything. The city was waking slowly, the soft orange glow of dawn filtering through the cracks in the blinds of Mark Hansen's apartment. He sat at the kitchen table, rubbing the fatigue from his eyes, with a strong cup of black coffee steaming in front of him. The case of the abandoned newborn, now known only as Hope, weighed heavily on his mind. He glanced at Rex, stretched out on the floor, the dog's steady breathing a comforting rhythm amid the chaos. Mark's phone buzzed sharply on the counter. It was Detective Sarah Lopez. "Morning," Sarah's voice crackled over the line. "We got a hit on Victor's phone records, something you'll want to see." Mark grabbed his coat, leash in hand, and headed out. The case was far from over, and the fragile thread of hope they'd found was still tangled in danger. At the precinct, Sarah pulled up a series of calls and messages from Victor's phone. The timestamps clustered around late nights and early mornings, the same hours. "When Emily had disappeared with the newborn, there's a pattern here," Sarah explained. Victor was coordinating with someone, maybe more than one person. These calls were two numbers registered out of state, some untraceable. Mark frowned. Trafficking rings could be. We're still piecing it together. The room felt colder, the weight of the unknown pressing in. Mark looked at the blurry faces on the screen and thought about Emily, her haunted eyes, her desperate escape. There was more to this story, buried deep beneath layers of fear and silence. Back at Mercy General, Hope was thriving. Nurse Kelly gave a glowing report. The baby's weight had increased. Her cries were stronger, and she was beginning to respond to voices. Emily, however, remained a shell of herself. Social workers pushed gently, but the scars of her past refused to heal overnight. Mark knew the key was trust. He made it a point to visit her regularly, sometimes with Rex by his side, hoping the steady presence of the dog might ease her fears. One afternoon, after a long silence, Emily spoke. "I want to tell you everything," she said, voice trembling but resolute. "You deserve to know." Mark leaned forward, listening. Emily's story unfolded in painful fragments. Victor wasn't just controlling, he was ruthless. She'd met him when she was young, vulnerable, and alone. At first he promised protection, stability, things she desperately needed. But soon, the masks fell away. "He wasn't just abusive to me," Emily confessed. "He was part of something bigger. I saw things, people brought in and taken away. Women, children, it was like a nightmare I couldn't wake from." Mark felt the chill of her words settle over him. "I got pregnant," she continued. "I thought maybe it was a chance to start over, to be free. But Victor, he wanted to keep control, even over my baby. I knew if I stayed, it wouldn't end well." Her eyes glistened with tears. "So I ran. I left her behind, hoping someone would find her and keep her safe." Mark's grip tightened on his chair. "You did the right thing, Emily. You saved her life." Emily shook her head. "I'm not sure I saved anything but my own skin." Mark reached across the table. "You saved more than you know." "Yes, Mark." Left the shelter that evening, Rex at his side, he felt the weight of the case deepen. This was no longer just about a single baby or a frightened mother. It was about breaking a cycle of silence that trapped so many in fear. Over the next week, Mark and Sarah worked tirelessly. With the new leads from Victor's phone, they began tracking a web of illicit activities, a network that stretched across state lines, exploiting the vulnerable and silencing those who dared to speak. Each step closer felt more dangerous. Mark found himself constantly watching over Emily and Hope, coordinating with social services to ensure their protection. As Mark walked Rex through a quiet neighborhood, the dog suddenly stopped, nose twitching toward a nearby alley. Mark's hand went to his holster. "What is it, boy?" Rex growled softly and padded toward a stack of garbage bins. Mark followed and spotted something glinting in the dim light, a small piece of jewelry, a locket that looked worn but carefully kept. Mark picked it up. Inside was a tiny photo of a young girl. His mind raced. Could this be another missing child? Another victim caught in the shadows? Back at the precinct, Mark showed Sarah the locket. "This has to mean something," she said, fingers tracing the tiny face inside. Missing persons reports, but nothing matched. "This may be someone who's never been reported," Sarah said quietly. "Someone still trapped." Mark's determination hardened. "We'll find them." The next days were a whirlwind of investigations, interviews, and leads. The more they uncovered, the more urgent the need to act became. Emily's courage inspired them all. Despite her fears, she agreed to testify, to help dismantle the network that had nearly destroyed her life. Mark stayed by her side during the long meetings and interviews, Rex never far behind. One night, after a particularly grueling day, Mark sat alone with Rex in the quiet of his apartment. He thought about Hope, about Emily, about the countless others still waiting for rescue. Mark looked down at Rex, who gazed back with steady, loyal eyes. "Not everyone gets a second chance, Rex," Mark said softly, "but we're going to fight. For everyone we can." And with that, a renewed sense of purpose filled him, a promise to protect the innocent and bring light to the darkest places. The city's pulse never really slowed down, even in the early hours before dawn. But for Mark Hansen, the days had started to feel like a never-ending chase, an exhausting pursuit to protect a fragile life and bring justice to those lurking in the shadows. Hope's crib at Mercy General had become a small island of safety in a world that had shown her so little kindness. Every time Mark stepped into the hospital's neonatal wing, the baby's tiny hands reaching out for comfort reminded him why this fight mattered. But the battle wasn't just about Hope anymore. It was about breaking a cycle of fear, silence, and cruelty that trapped too many people like Emily. Detective Sarah Lopez was relentless. She had spent hours sifting through intercepted phone calls and financial records, chasing every breadcrumb left by Victor and his associates. "Mark," she said one afternoon as they pored over the latest findings in the cramped interrogation room, "we're closing in on the heart of this operation." The names they uncovered were chilling. A network stretching across state lines, involving traffickers, enforcers, and silent accomplices. "It's worse than I imagined," Mark admitted, rubbing his forehead. "These people don't just prey on the vulnerable, they tear families apart." Sarah nodded, "and they silence anyone who tries to speak up." Mark's gaze dropped to the floor. That's why Emily was so scared. She wasn't just running from Victor, she was running from a system designed to keep her quiet. Back at the shelter, Emily was slowly rebuilding her life. The walls that had once closed in around her began to crumble, brick by brick. The support from social workers, the kindness of hospital staff, and Mark's steady presence gave her a glimpse of something she hadn't felt in a long time. One afternoon, Mark stopped by for a visit. Rex, ever loyal, wagged his tail and rested his head on Emily's lap. "You're doing good, Emily," Mark said softly. "You're stronger than you think." Emily looked up, eyes filled with gratitude and fear. "I want to help. I want to make sure no one else has to go through what I did." Mark smiled, but his eyes were serious. "That takes courage." As the investigation intensified, so did the threats. Mark received warnings, anonymous calls, strange cars parked near the hospital, and shadowy figures watching from afar. But with every threat, his resolve only grew stronger. One night, while driving home, Mark noticed a black SUV tailing him. Rex growled low in the back seat. Mark stayed calm, weaving through city streets until the SUV disappeared into the distance. "Not today," he muttered, gripping the steering wheel tighter. The tension spilled over into the courtroom. Emily was scheduled to testify against Victor and his network. It was the moment of truth, a chance to break the silence and bring justice to light. Mark accompanied Emily, Rex by his side, as she took the stand. The courtroom was packed. The judge's gaze was stern, the air thick with anticipation. Voice trembled at first, but grew stronger with each word. She told her story. The fear, the abuse, the desperation that led to abandoning hope. She spoke of Victor's cruelty and the darkness that shadowed her life. Her testimony was a beacon of courage, lighting the path for others who had been silenced. Outside the courthouse, Mark caught his breath. The sun was setting, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink. Rex sat patiently beside him, tail wagging slowly. "We did good today, boy," Mark whispered. "But this is just the start." Hope's story touched more than just Mark and Emily. It spread through the community, sparking conversations and calls for change. Local shelters saw an influx of people seeking help. Social workers gained resources to support victims. Law enforcement launched new initiatives to combat trafficking and abuse. Mark found himself speaking at community events, sharing Hope's story and the power of breaking silence. One quiet evening, Mark visited the hospital's neonatal wing. Hope, now a few months old, smiled up at him with bright eyes full of promise. He gently cradled her tiny hand. "We're going to keep fighting for you," he vowed softly. Rex rested his head on Mark's knee, a silent guardian of hope and healing. The road ahead was long and uncertain, but Mark knew one thing for sure. No child would be abandoned in silence while he and Rex were watching. Together, they would be the light in the darkness, the voice for the voiceless, and that was a promise worth keeping. The morning sun filtered gently through the hospital blinds, casting a soft golden glow over the neonatal ward. For the first time in what felt like forever, there was a sense of quiet reassurance that hope, fragile but fierce, was beginning to take root. Mark Hansen stood quietly beside Hope's crib. The baby had grown noticeably stronger in recent weeks, her tiny fingers curling confidently around the nurse's gloved hand. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was thriving. Beside Mark, Rex sat alert, his eyes bright and watchful as always. It was hard to believe this was the same abandoned infant they had found wrapped in a dirty hospital blanket behind a dumpster. Left to fend for herself in the cold night, now she was a symbol not just of survival, but of the resilience and courage found in the most unexpected places. Mark's phone buzzed, breaking the stillness. It was a message from Detective Sarah Lopez. Victor sentenced, network dismantled. Justice moving forward. Mark allowed himself a small, tired smile. The case that had consumed months of his life was finally reaching a conclusion. But he knew the fight wasn't over. There were still too many, like Emily, like Hope, caught in the shadows, waiting for someone to stand up for them. Mark glanced down at Rex, who nudged his hand with a soft nudge. "We did good, boy. Real good." Later that day, Mark visited Emily. She was back at the shelter, working with counselors and starting to rebuild the pieces of a life shattered by fear and abuse. When Mark walked into the small, modest room where she was sitting, Emily looked up with a tentative smile. "How's Hope?" she asked, her voice steady but warm. "Better than ever," Mark replied. "She's a fighter, just like her mom." Emily's eyes filled with tears, not of sorrow this time, but of hope. "I want to thank you," she said softly, "for believing. Me, for standing by us." Mark shook his head. "You did the hardest part. You found the courage to break free." Emily nodded. "I'm ready to face whatever comes next." Outside, the city bustled with life. The world went on, but for Mark, Rex, Emily, and Hope, everything had changed. The shelter was preparing to place Hope in a loving foster home, one that promised safety and the chance for a family she deserved. Emily was working with social workers to regain custody when the time was right. Determined to provide a better future for her daughter, Mark walked Rex through a quiet park near the hospital, the crisp fall air carrying the scent of turning leaves. "People don't always see what's really going on," Mark mused aloud, "but sometimes all it takes is one person to make a difference." Rex looked up at him, as if understanding every word. "We were lucky, Rex. Hope was lucky. But what about the others?" Mark wondered aloud. "How many more are still waiting?" Mark's phone buzzed again, another call, another case. The job never truly ended. But with each story like Hope's, Mark found renewed strength to keep going. And sometimes that light comes from a loyal dog, a brave officer, and the quiet courage of a newborn who refused to give up. As the sun set on the city skyline, Mark sat in his apartment, Rex resting at his feet. He thought about the journey, the pain, the fear, the fight for justice, and, most of all, the hope that carried them through. He reached for his phone and typed a message to the Brave Animals channel. "Thank you to everyone who has followed Hope's story. Your support means the world." What stories of courage and resilience have touched your heart lately? We'd love to hear from you. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Stories like Hope's remind us of the power of compassion, the importance of standing up for those who can't stand up for themselves, and the incredible bond between humans and animals. What do you think makes someone truly brave? Have you ever witnessed a quiet act of courage that changed everything? Share your thoughts below. We're listening.